What's going on, guys? Welcome to In the Zone. I'm your host, Garrison Roy, and today we're going to have a very special full-length interview. But before we get into that, please share the show if you get any value out of this, right? We do this through just word of mouth and value exchange because I don't do ads or sponsorships or monetize the show in any way. So when you guys share it, that's the way we actually get to have more listeners listen and learn from all the things to help grow the game and help become better coaches and players all together. We also have different episodes for rants, mental minutes, which are quick mental game hacks to elevate your performance as a coach or player, and then deep dive educational explorations to help with either skill acquisition, training, rehab, or even more on the mental side. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right into this full-length interview. This is with Alex Acevedo. He's been on here at episode 13, so feel free to go back and listen to that one. But he's the co-founder of Fearless Sports Performance. He's also a CSCS now and has experience with athletes of all levels. And he's pursuing his DPT at the University of Southern Cal. And he's now currently in the clinical rotation with the Guardians. Also did it with Pinecrest and Movement Sports Institute. So I had a lot of newer experiences since the last time you were on, right, Alex? But yeah, without further ado, what's going on, my man?
Yeah, man, it's great to be here, great to talk, and always a pleasure to see you, talk to you, and talk baseball, talk performance, talk rehab, all the above.
100%, man. I mean, hey, like that's kind of how we first met was whenever you were still playing and I was starting out my coaching career. So we kind of cultivated that relationship, kept it rolling through there. And now you shifted gears to go into, physical therapy and getting ready to make it a reality, my man, which is awesome.
Yeah, man, yeah, and those are good memories when we met. I think you were really like the biggest catalyst kind of in my decision. Originally, I wanted to go into kind of the front office side of baseball, and it was planning on going to law school somehow, and you were really like the big catalyst and kind of changing my mind and staying in the performance and rehab side of things and kind of being in the trenches. So definitely some good memories and some good impact you've had on me and my life for sure.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, man. And now you're actually out making a difference and being the boots on the ground, like you said, in the
Yeah.
thick of it with a lot of the guys in the Guardians organization, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And I know we'll probably get into this a little bit as far as, what your role is and what you've been doing, but how's that just experience as a whole been for you, right? Like obviously guys who go to physical therapy that have clinical rotations and, they could have various different types, but obviously this is the background that you want to have and you want to stay in baseball, right? So how's that experience been compared to like just being in the classroom the first couple of years?
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely, I spent 2.5 years, well, minus 6 weeks, my first 6 week rotation, which was my second, yeah, my second rotation in PT school. I think it was my first summer. Then I was at a baseball, Pinecrest Performance is what it's called. I was at a baseball facility, did performance and rehab. So minus those 6 weeks, I've been outside of baseball for the last 2.5 years, doing fearless stuff on the side of school and helping out where I can, training some guys remotely. But the majority of my time I've spent kind of in a non-baseball environment and non-baseball culture with non-baseball people. And so now kind of being in really the thick of it in spring training with the Guardians and being around baseball people, baseball culture, baseball players, baseball coaches, baseball everything, all literally all day long because we got long days all week long because we're going Monday through Saturday. We had a stretch of Sundays that we weren't getting off, and so literally just every day baseball, nothing but. Um, it's really gotten me to appreciate how special the baseball world is and how special the baseball culture is and baseball people, and how much I missed it. I didn't even realize how much I was missing that kind of all day every day baseball in my life until now. And now I'm like, man, I was really miserable without baseball, and now being back in it, it's like, yeah, I need this in my life for sure. So it's been a great experience on that side of things, and just to kind of see what a top-notch organization like the Guardians, how they run, because the Guardians are a phenomenal organization. And they do a really good job. And they have not just that they do a really good job and are very good about how they handle the business, but they have amazing people. And I think that's why it runs so well is they have really, really good people in the Guardian. So it's been a super positive experience. I have nothing bad to say. Top-notch organization, top-notch people, and I've been able to learn a lot from them. It's been a really good experience.
I love it. Well, sometimes, yeah, like you said, whenever you leave a certain bubble or aspect of anything, and then you come back, or like, almost in a way where you leave America, you go to a different country and you come back, you have a different appreciation for things that you may not have, or maybe taken advantage of, or, taken for granted. And you're like, oh, yeah, this is what it was all about. Or, hey, kind
Uh,
of reignite that vision of what you're going for with what you and Fearless and Joey are doing together with that. So it's pretty cool.
Definitely. Yeah, it's definitely been a positive experience on that front. And it's been really cool to like be in it, and like kind of the, because this is definitely a different set. Like pro ball is a totally different setting, than
Oh,
outside of pro ball. And it's been really cool to see how a pro organization works, especially being at the Arizona complex. You got, especially now with spring training, you have so many different minds, all in the same building, and so many different domains, between performance, sports science, PT, the athletic trainers, um, all the coaches, hitting, pitching, everything, front office, like literally everything. You got a nutritionist. Like if you can think of it, of anything that would contribute to the game, they got somebody for it. And so to have all of that all in the same house and the same roof and so many minds, and seeing the way that because at least with the Guardians, they work really well together. They have really good systems to have just like really good communication, and it's chaos, but it's like a beautiful chaos that kind of comes together really well. Um,
self-organization, right?
yeah. It's really, really cool to see the kind of the communication of everything and how everything fits together, and how everybody works together to kind of make something happen, especially for so many athletes. You got, over 150 guys in the building. So it's really cool to see how everybody kind of works together to get everybody what they need. And the Guardians are good at developing. So it's been cool to be a part of that, and see kind of how all that works.
Oh yeah, and then you have all those minds working towards one main goal, which is either winning games or helping guys recover and be healthy on the performance and rehab side, right? Like, and
Yeah.
all those pulling in that one direction. And I even had this discussion with a guy in the Padres organization. So again, it's very similar across all major league programs. Is, hey, like, you want people to not always be yes men. You want someone to kind of not necessarily challenge everything that you say, but you want different perspectives or different ways to look at things to really just kind of keep yourself in check, right? Like, you want to make sure that you're not overlooking something, or maybe it's like, oh, hey, I didn't think about this aspect. On, maybe a nutritionist says, hey, like, you need to add some of this in and help with their rehab or performance, or, vice versa. There's someone there who's like, hey, like, this mental thing that he's going through is affecting everything else, right? It's
Exactly.
all works together, right?
Yeah, and you got to have that commitment to learning. Like, I think that's the great thing, is that everybody has something to offer, and being able to kind of like have those relationships and that communication to kind of learn from each other and see where everybody can kind of offer something to the common goal, and kind of lift everybody up. It's really good. Especially you mentioned like the kind of mental performance aspect of things, like in rehab and kind of the side of things that I've been in now. It's so important. A lot of these guys, during their rehabs, they hit those mental walls. It's tough, man, especially those long rehabs. It's real tough, and not just having the mental performance team involved, but also getting, one of the things that's been really cool is to watch how some of these guys that have gone through rehabs in the past will kind of connect them with the current rehab guys, and build those relationships, and that makes a massive difference. We got a couple guys that are previous rehabbers that work a lot with or have good relationships with the current rehabbers, and it's really cool to see kind of how that kind of works together, and how it
Yeah, you have the
brings
dynamic.
rehab guys up, and those kind of the um the professional level of it. Those guys are real pros. They really do a good job of kind of being there for those guys, and it's really good, really great to see. Does a lot of good for those guys that are kind of going through it.
Oh, 100%. And a lot of it too on the mental side is more of like, hey, you got to also buy in on the system. So whether you're having another guy that's in front of you, maybe going through a very similar thing, or maybe he went through a similar injury in the past, and he's, maybe a couple of years ahead of you, or drafted in a different class, and you're like, oh, hey, like, how was your experience? What was this going on? And that builds that level of trust, to be like, hey, yeah, like these guys helped me get through this, and this is what we did for the plan for this, and this is the end goal of what happened after. And then, that it kind of really gives guys a lot of a sigh of relief to where, maybe other experiences, whether it was college or high school, they didn't have as big of a support system. So then now they're like, okay, is this really the right way to do things? That got injured again, like secondary Tommy John is pretty common these days, as just as an example. But, then they're like, okay, hey, like, what's this process going to look like? Right. Because
Yeah,
then,
and
yeah.
and trusting that process too is a big deal that these guys kind of will help with. Is like when you have guys around you that have been through it and know kind of what's normal and stuff. As a rehab guy, that those guys are they're especially if they're going through it for the first time. There's a lot of things that they're going to be feeling that they've probably never experienced before. They don't know if it's normal, if it's just part of the process, whatever. So having those guys who have been through it to kind of lean on and kind of give them that support to say, oh no, like that's part of it. Keep pushing. It gives them that assurance that like, all right, I'm in a good spot. I'm on my way. We're going to be good. And the psychological component is massive when it comes to recovering. So it really helps to keep those guys in the right headspace. And that makes our job easier as PTs and those professionals that are trying to get those rehab guys back and healthy, because they're gonna improve much better if they're feeling good and they're positive and they got that mental game on lock. It really helps them to recover better and trust their body and move forward with the process when they're struggling mentally and they don't know exactly if what they're feeling is right and all that stuff. It is a tough roadblock that you got to really kind of work with. So it's really good to have that, and it's really good to have a lot of the Guardians have a lot of really good people, not just on the professional side, like not just on like the coaching side and the PT side and the AT side and all that stuff, but also within the players. They got a lot of really good people within the players. I think that kind of precedent is set by the culture of the organization. So it's really good. They got a lot of really like pros. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Uh,
They're,
so it's
they're good humans.
Yeah, they're true professionals. They're true professionals, and that helps because when you got a bunch of true professionals around you, you become a true professional, and true professionals do a lot better, just because they handle their business better, and that's really cool to see. Is like I've been able to kind of see the difference between a lot of the like true professionals and some of the guys who aren't that so much, and the differences in talent level. The differences in the way that they work, the way that they handle their business, their demeanor, the way that they treat people, the way that they treat their work, everything. And it makes a difference in how they perform and how they develop. Massive difference. And it's easy to see, the guys that are really successful, it's not because they're unbelievably talented. Obviously they are. But that's not the separating factor. The separating factor is truly how they handle their business. And that's a really big thing that I think a lot of young guys that kind of aren't around the pro world as much don't get to see so much, but really being around it every day now that I'm seeing it in these guys day in and day out. It's a massive difference maker in how successful you're going to be. So I think that's something that a lot of these young guys really need to pay attention to is like how are they as humans and how do they interact and how do they go about their work and where is their focus and all that stuff, because it's very important, especially in the rehab process, but not just in the rehab process, in every aspect of baseball performance, especially it's big.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's an iron sharpens iron thing, right? Like even the salty vets can help really just being around, and I've seen it even in the private sector where some of the pro guys are around and they see high school and college guys and they notice how meticulous or how just focused they are, right? They're in the zone even in their training,
Yeah.
how they're going about just a normal warm-up routine, or how they're very, very intentional on just every single throw that they do. And that bleeds over. They're like, oh wow, okay, like if that's where I want to be one day, like I gotta stay locked in to be
Yeah.
able to do everything that I gotta do for that.
Okay. Yeah. And kind of, example of that. So I've been lucky enough that I've been able to kind of observe Shane Bieber a little bit in some instances, and that guy, it is a very, very clear difference between him and everybody else. Not in the talent level. I mean, obviously he's unbelievably talented,
Yeah,
but in the
got
way he
good
goes
stuff
about his
too, for sure.
business, the level of focus that he has is really, really something special to watch. I don't even know how to describe it fully, but there's an aura about him because of the level of his focus that it's just different. The way he throws in his, even in his catch play, bullpens, everything. It's really, really special. Just the level of focus on every little thing. You can see kind of the intent. There's thought behind every movement, every throw. Everything is just so meticulous with him, and that's why he's so successful.
Absolutely. Well, and that's not to be confused with almost kind of doming yourself up too. Like you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
overdo
yeah, yeah,
things.
yeah.
And I think that's what makes a difference maker for a lot of these guys is they know that kind of fine line. They know it's like, okay, hey, this is when I'm making sure that I'm doing everything correctly, and then this is kind of when I'm taking it overboard. Or
Yeah,
you have the
yeah,
coaches in place that are like, hey man, get back over here. Like
yeah,
you're
yeah,
going down in the weeds a little bit,
yeah.
right?
And with him, like his focus is a very calm focus. It's a very it's a special focus to watch. He's not all over the place with his thoughts. He's not thinking about this, that, asking all these questions, whatever. It's like, throws a pitch. He's very aware of kind of what he felt in that throw. He sees the outcome. He takes the results of his outcome. He thinks about how that matches up with what he felt and what the outcome was. And then he makes an adjustment. And then the next pitch, we're back at it. Boom. And everything is so calm, so focused, so easygoing. The level of emotion is just kind of stays the same. It
Yeah,
doesn't Yeah, it doesn't spike, it doesn't drop. It's just we're locked in, we're getting our work in. He throws a bad pitch. There's no spike in emotion. There's no like, he's mad at himself. It's just, all right, that was the outcome. This is what I felt. This is the adjustment I need to make. Back at it. Boom, we're locked in. It's really
yeah.
cool. Really cool to watch. That's the way you got to be.
Well, we learned that even back in our ranch days, right? It was like, hey, you
Yeah.
can't attach negative emotion to a failure because then that almost enhances that failure to happen again.
Yeah, your body doesn't know the difference between positive and negative emotion. So when you attach that negative emotion to a negative outcome, your body's going to say, "Oh yeah, 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 we like that. We're going to do that again." And that's not good. We definitely don't want that. We want to keep that even keel. We're locked in, we're focused, and the negative emotions, yeah, I mean the negative outcomes, I don't like to look at negative outcomes as a bad thing necessarily, but just kind of data. It's all it is it's
Oh,
just
data point.
guiding where we need to move forward to. And I think that's an approach that a lot of people need to take.
Absolutely. Well, and kind of getting on that a little bit on the just the mental side and failure, right? And you can put this in quotes as the word failure, but even injuries, right? Like guys will still have some of those mental blocks, especially when they first start to like the return to throw. They have that kind of fear in the back of their head. They're like, oh man, like I don't want to injure myself again. Or, I had that same feeling. I don't want that feeling to happen. Even if they consciously don't think it, it's subconsciously ingrained where they're just maybe just kind of lightly doing something, or maybe their patterns are changing to avoid a certain pattern that or certain situations. For example, guys that I've seen that have come back, they're really good all through the return to throwing process until they start to throw off speed pitches, and that was the pitch that they tore it on, and then they're like, oh man, like, and they just have this gripping, almost tangible
Fear with it.
uh,
Yeah.
brick wall that they're trying to get through, or maybe it's a left-handed batter, place whatever you want on that.
Yeah.
But there is certain roadblocks, and obviously that kind of ties in with what we talked about before with the mental side. But how would you, as the rehab specialist, learn and kind of identify that and help them and expose them to those things a little bit during that return to throwing process.
Yeah, and kind of to start, like that's so common. Like that is almost every single guy. They're going to feel some level of that at some point in their rehab, whether it's getting back on the mound, whether it's starting to throw off speed pitches, whether it's the first day that they're going to throw,
Could be all
whatever.
those,
There's
right?
yeah, there's going to be some level of that. It's so common. And I've been able to have those conversations with a lot of these guys now, that are going through it. Some of these guys are really starting to ramp up now. And so being able to have those conversations, and a lot of these guys are real professionals where they're able to kind of self-reflect on their own thoughts, thinking about their own thoughts, which is really cool. And so I think it's a mix, kind of attacking that. It's a mix between kind of the education component of just having conversations about where they're at, and what we see and what we feel is safe, and all that. And then also, making sure that they have the confidence in, I've already done all of these things and gone through all these steps, and I am prepared to kind of move to this next phase, whatever it might be. But I think, starting kind of with the education component, like, and I'll kind of say this, which I think has helped a lot of guys, is like realizing how much so like, for example, UCL, Tom, see, got a guy who just had TJ, um, being able to understand, like, when they do that surgery, not only do they just, tighten the hell out of it, make that thing strong as hell, and then close you back up, but they crank the hell out of your elbow. Like they are absolutely cranking on that UCL. And, I know, a lot of surgeons, like post surgery, they'll talk to their guys, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, like I did a hell of a job. That thing ain't going anywhere. Like that thing is strong." And it's because they know, like they went in there and they freaking cranked on it. Like that thing's strong. So making sure that, like, guys know that, like, all right, like I'm in a good spot. Um, and understanding, like, okay, we're taking this the right way, we're doing all the phases, everything looks good on our end. I think part of that too comes with, like, what are we measuring? Are we just having them go through the phases, or are we, like, measuring every piece of the phase, making sure the stress is where we want it, making sure their strength is where we want it, making sure everything looks good? Because then we have the data to show them and be like, hey, make
Mhm.
sure, like, they know, all right, I'm prepared, I've gone through this amount of stress, everything's locked in, everything looks good, we're ready for the next step. And then on their end of, like, the actual feel of, like, I've done all of these things, like, I think it's really important, with the throwing program, is, instead of just like, I think I think everybody can agree, at least almost everybody can agree in baseball now, that the current return to throw program is absolutely not good.
Garbage. Yeah.
It's, yeah, and we've been using it for super long, and it hasn't been updated enough. And I think the common consensus is, and I talk a lot about it with our current rehab coach over here, with the Guardians, Dan Mahoney. We've talked a lot about that. The current return to throw program is not great. And that's one of his big projects, is like, trying to start from the ground up, and create something that's much better. Or at least, something in the right direction.
A little bit
Um,
measurable, right? Versus a very,
yeah, more measurable, to say, like, oh, we're just going to throw this many throws this distance and call it at that. It's just not good. Like, we have to be able to measure stress in some capacity, and we have to be, taking that stress, that workload, and that should be the focus of, the kind of the ramp up, and the moving forward between phases, instead of, like, distance and amount of throws. Obviously, volume is important. Distance makes a difference because it changes the mechanics a little bit, but I think the real focus should be stress and workload. So, I think, like, at least, a step in the right direction. And I think it's really important to at least be measuring velos. I think driveline pulse is really cool too, that we have that tech to kind of see stress levels and workload. Problem with pulse is that it's not great between players. You can't really compare players, but
right.
within a player, it gives you good data. So that's a good tool. But I think velo, because it's directly comparable to where we want them in their performance.
Mhm.
Um, and it's something that everybody understands for the most part. I think it's super, super, useful. So that's one of the things that that I think is great is that to use velos with rehab guys with all their throwing programs, and kind of have them within a window. You not just a cap, but also a floor. I've seen guys that we got to push them because they're wanting to stay at 60 no matter what distance they're at.
Right.
And you got to be like, nah, man, like we need you in like a 72 to 76 range today. Like we're gonna push that a little bit more, or like, I've seen other guys that'll be like, all right, like I'm pulling down 91 from 120, and it's like, yo, like no, 80 to 85 today. Chill out. We're not ready for that. Like we don't even want you like getting to that when you're off the mound in a couple weeks. Like chill.
Well,
um,
it's crazy to me too, especially it's more I see it at a younger age where kids just don't, and players in general, they don't have a gauge with what their actual RP is with what's
yes.
actually coming out of their hand.
100%. And I think that's another very valuable skill that kind of comes out of tracking the velos. Is that then guys like, it's one guy over here with the guards that will play a game in his throwing program that the first few throws, once he's kind of, like calibrated up, it's like, he'll throw like the same velo to the decimal, like 5 throws in a row. It's crazy. He's very in tune with his body.
Wow.
But we'll play a game that'll be like, all right, like, I'm gonna call 79 right here, and then he'll throw it and he'll be like 70, 77 or 82, or he'll hit a 79. And then we'll kind of play like that. And he's really, really in tune with his body. But I think that's a really important skill for guys, is to understand like, okay, where actually am I? And it kind of gives them a little bit better feel of their body, their intensity, and gives them a kind of a better chance to kind of be athletic.
Oh, 100%. When you have that in touch and later on down, I'm just thinking of this beyond the rehab side. Like if you can get in tune with that in the actual performance, you're like, hey, I'm going to throw an 8 out of 10 fastball here and then now a 10 out of 10 fastball there. And that alone can help with their performance a ton.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And that's kind of where my passion lies, is like bridging the gap between performance and rehab. I love the rehab side of things. I love the performance side of things. For me, both, I don't want to just kind of pigeonhole myself in rehab or performance or somewhere else. I want to be able to do it all, which is kind of why I'm, trying to do everything I'm doing right now and set myself up for the future. But yeah, 100%, man, I agree. Like I think a lot of the rehab concepts apply really well to performance, and a lot of the performance concepts apply really well to rehab. And I think that's one of the shortcomings of kind of the rehab world, the PT world, especially outside of sports, is that we have a lot of PTs who don't know enough about exercise physiology and strength training and all that stuff. And like you go to a typical clinic, and like a typical outpatient ortho clinic, and a patient will be doing all their exercises. They'll talk the entire time throughout every single rep. Um, and then they're like,
There's no
oh no,
challenge.
like
Yeah.
3 sets of 10, I'll just do all 30 now, so I don't have to wait in between. It's like, what are we accomplishing?
Yeah. There's
Just,
no, they're not mentally primed to
yeah,
the
yeah,
actual task that they're doing. If it's so mindless that they're not even having to focus, not saying that it needs to be so strenuous that they're like, oh my gosh, I can't talk to you, but you
yeah,
have to
but
have something to where, and I've talked to this, not sure if you listened to this episode, but Yuji Suzuki, he was in a previous one, chiropractor, but he was just talking about rehab, and he was like, hey, why do we have to do all the reps the same? Or be like, hey, show me how many different ways you can, like, if you're dealing with low back injury, for example, how many ways can you pick up a ball off the ground? Just something really simple, but
yeah,
you're also very cognitively in tune with what you're doing.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
then
yeah.
you're not doing the same exact rep over and over. And there's a time and place for it. Obviously, I'm sure you could be like, hey, like when you first start out, like you have kind of more general physical preparedness,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
obviously life comes at you different ways and you got to prepare things that are
yeah.
imperfect
Yeah,
reps.
that's kind of building, I guess, like athleticism too, is like, exploring movement and exploring like where your body is in space and all that. It's important, kind of for everyone. Rehab, performance, general population, normal human being, like it's important to kind of have that athleticism to know where your body is and how you move and what you're feeling and all that stuff. For sure. But back to kind of the throwing stuff we were talking about, not to take us on a tangent there.
All about it.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's super important with tracking all of that data, especially velo, because then like, it'll give a guy that confidence to say like, oh, like I'm easy, 80 to 85 for the last however many weeks. I'm feeling really, really good. I got really excited one day and I popped a 91 and I was told to back off, but I felt really good after that. Like I got it in me. I'm ready to jump to the mound. Like no problem. And then when they jump to the mound and we start them, in the 70s, off the mound, nice and light, and then build them back up from there. They know like, oh yeah, we're good. Like I'm off the slope. I feel great. Like no issues. And that, even though it's not a massive jump because the stress level, we're keeping it low from the start. It's a big mental block, to get back off of the slope. So it kind of eliminates some of that for them to know like, all right, like I am prepared for the stresses. Everything feels good. My UCL's taken everything, like no issues. Stress levels have been high. Let's move forward with this jump, and we're ready to rock. And I think kind of that progression helps guys a lot versus, if you're not tracking anything and you got a guy, let's say you had them throwing up to, 120 feet, which is like the typical, program, or 150 feet or whatever. And they're just lobbing it, throwing 60, 65, whatever. You haven't been tracking it. And then you jump them off of a mound where on the slope, they're probably going to, from the get go, especially if you're not tracking them, they're going to want to push it, 65 at 120 feet on flat ground versus maybe 85 off of the mound,
Big jumps, big jumps.
that's a massive spike right there that you definitely want to avoid in a rehab. And I think if you're not tracking anything and you're not tracking that workload, that could happen. I think that could be very common in those cases. So,
And
really,
guys get excited, they're pumped up, especially if they don't have the guidance like a professional org, right? High school, college.
yeah.
Oh, we're on the mound. Let's go.
Definitely. And I think that happens a lot because, outside of the professional org or the higher levels, you got guys, doing their rehab with a typical, normal PT clinic who may not be as prepared to kind of handle those kinds of patients, those kind of athletes. And then once they get through the rehab and they're cleared, you throw them off to the baseball coach. Baseball coach isn't going to be as prepared to take them through that return to throw program. You might run into that a lot. And I think that's one of my big advices for young guys, for high school guys, college guys that don't have the same resources is like, if you're going to do rehab with someone, you got to really make sure that they're prepared to handle high level athletes. Because in, like, for example, in PT school, I've been 3 years in school now. We have not spent much time at all on sports. Like forget baseball, sports, like very, very little time on sports. If you want to get into the sports, education of things, you got to do, which is what I'm doing next year, is a sports residency. But or learn it on your own, get a great mentor, like all that stuff. But within school, in PT school, there's so much to go over that sports really kind of takes a little bit of the back burner. It doesn't get as much time. Really unfortunate, but that's the reality of things because most PTs aren't getting into those high level sports. And the board exam is not covering the high level sports as much,
Right. Yeah,
which is important.
that's for sure.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, my recommendation for any young guys looking is if you're going to look for a PT to do your rehab with, look for someone who's either has a sports certified specialization, which is SCS. You'll see that as one of their suffixes. Look for if they don't have that, they at least got to have some level of or not some level, a good level of high level athlete experience, especially in your sport that you're going through.
Oh yeah,
That
any
you're
type
playing.
of track record of who they've done in the past, absolutely.
Exactly. And then word of mouth. And I think especially in baseball, word of mouth is huge. Guys talk. And that's kind of how things work in the pro world. Guys go to the PTs that other guys are talking about. And that's a big indication of, I think, experience. If real good baseball players, and a lot of them are talking about or going to a certain guy, they're probably pretty good. So looking for those three things is that word of mouth within the baseball world or the sports world, whatever sport you're in. Experience. Have they worked in a pro org? Have they spent a bunch of time working with athletes? Are they, the PT for whatever, high level D1 college, whatever. Or that sports certified specialization, which is becoming a lot more common as residencies becoming more and more common within the PT world.
100%. Would you, and this is just kind of more of a general question, do you think general physical therapy for, I guess, the general population versus sports, do you think that's almost, how do I say this? Do you think it's almost under preparing them for real life because of maybe the lack of them being able to be stressed? Because like in sports, you're like, hey, you got to take on a lot more stress. But, how common is it to see someone who's in Gen Pop not be fully ready for the demands of what might be thrown at them?
Yeah, I think it depends on where they're at, like what clinic, what PT, all that stuff. I think there's a lot of great and being a USC guy, I'm around a lot of really good PTs. We have a great network of great PTs.
Mm.
And so I think there's a lot of great PTs out there that work with Gen Pop that do a hell of a job of preparing them, stressing them, like getting after it. And that's something that I think we've been pushed that other PT programs may not be pushed as much. Is like we get a lot of that, like, all right, like we gotta stress our people. We get a lot of that kind of exercise science, kinesiology kind of background, and addition, that supplement to the PT curriculum. But I definitely think that there's a lot of PT out there that is very, it's not the quality that I think people need. And it doesn't push people as much as they need to be pushed. It's, a lot of massages and ice and stim, and that ain't gonna, that's where you see people, continue to get injured.
And that's when they check out, when they don't come to physical therapy because subconsciously they're like, all right, like this is not working because there is no challenge. There is nothing that they're
I'm
trying.
not doing anything there. I could do it at home, or,
Right.
and that's something that I think, unfortunately, it's more common than we need it to be. And I saw, so my last clinical rotation in the fall was at the Movement Performance Institute in LA with Dr. Chris Powers. He runs it. He does a lot of ACL research, a lot of knee research. He's really awesome. They have a really cool biomechanics lab. And they do a lot of really cool high level stuff there. And it's very different from anything you'll see at your typical PT clinic. It's a totally different model. And they're cash pay. So a lot of the people that we saw were people that failed in rehab somewhere else, and then they were like, okay, I need something high level. I'm going to pay out of my pocket and make sure that I get everything I need, and then they come over to MPI and get the best of the best in knee rehab. And that really opened my eyes to, like, okay, yeah, like there's some tough PT out there, kind of hearing the stories of what they were doing before, and just the lack of preparedness, the lack of objective measures, the lack of pushing people. I was really pushed with my patients in the fall to, like, really make sure that I'm, getting after it with them, and challenging them and making things hard and making sure that they're, getting to sweat and challenging those muscles, and getting to failure and all that stuff, because it's important. It's really important to push people, and make sure that they're getting the stress that they need to get the adaptation that we're looking for. Because at the end of the day, PT, performance training, all that stuff is, we're trying to take these people and essentially shock their muscles into saying, oh crap, we failed. Now we got to get stronger. We got to build better. We got to create whatever way that we stressed it, and whatever adaptation that the kind of the goal was. It's like, okay, now we got to create that adaptation. Let's go make it happen. And if you're not stressing the muscle and really forcing it into failure, or at least like a high level of stress, it's not going to make that adaptation. It's just going to stay comfortable, and we don't want that.
100%. Well, I'm sure you probably even being around Powers, and you said he focuses on lower extremities, correct?
Does a lot of knee stuff. Yeah, a lot of lower extremity. Yeah.
A lot of that seems to be light years ahead of any shoulder or elbow. And again, it's a different thing because knees, even though it is more of a hinge joint, similar to an elbow, like you're going to be constantly on it. it has a little bit different adaptations. But as far as like what they do, for example, like an ACL rehab, some guys are like walking out ready to rock and roll right after the surgery. And then
Yeah,
you
yeah,
got us guys who have arm surgeries and we're just still in a sling for like 3, 4 weeks.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Everyone has their own thought process on that. But
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a topic of conversation right now in the in just the PT and performance, rehab performance world. Is that specifically right there is like, okay, what should the right after post op look like? But yeah, no, definitely the knee is light years ahead of the arm, when it comes to just because of the sheer volume of research on the knee. And that has to do with the fact that I think the knee is a little bit easier to deal with. Elbow specifically is outside of baseball. It's just not as common of an injury to see. I think it's very within the baseball world. Shoulder is the one that's more common in the upper extremity, just generally. And the shoulder is a really, really hard joint to deal with because of the lack of structural stability. So people tend to kind of shy away from shoulder when they're thinking about what research they want to do, and gravitate towards the knee because it's a little less complex.
right,
That's why I think the knee has a lot more research behind it. And definitely there's a lot of concepts that we can take from the knee and bring it to the upper extremity, just from like the way that we handle rehab and progressions and stuff like that. Um, I took a lot from kind of what I learned at MPI and the way they handled things. So their clinic is really cool with that. They have, all the really cool toys and tech and, everything to measure whatever you need to measure. So being able to kind of take that process that they have over there, that's very, very unique and different from kind of what we typically learn in school and what you typically see in an outpatient ortho clinic, where everything is measured objectively and we're measuring strength.
Mhm.
We're focused less on range of motion, more strength. And I think that that's because, strength is massive. And I think through strength training, you can create range of motion better than just static stretching, which is a whole nother topic of conversation.
Right.
But we're looking at a lot of strength, looking at biomechanics, lots of biomechanics. And I love the biomechanics approach that they take at Movement Performance Institute, where the first thing that we do when someone comes in is look at the way they're walking, the way they're running, whatever it is that was causing them the pain. We look at that, the biomechanics of that. And then
See what
from
else
there,
compensates. Oh, for sure.
yeah, exactly. From there, we take our hypotheses of, okay, this is possibly what could be weak. This is what could be, shortened. This is what could be whatever, this or that. And then we measure. And that way we have that guidance of like, okay, what do we need to measure? What are we looking for? What could be causing this? Because at the end of the day, movement is king. Movement gives us a big, big understanding of what could be going wrong, and what the issue is. The issue isn't going to be it's going to be a lot harder to figure out the issue without understanding the context of the movement and the compensations that they're having and all that stuff. And yeah, man, I think that's massive, and I think that's something that we can definitely take into the baseball world that isn't as common as like, okay, movement first, and then from there let's move forward and look at all these objective measures and stuff, be as objective as possible, and then retest often and see exactly where we're headed, and then make adjustments from there. It's huge. And I think with that, you got to look at kind of the whole picture of things. One of the things and we joke around about this with Dr. Powers, because a lot of his research, almost all of his research, will come to the conclusion of glutes, which makes sense because the glutes are huge for protecting the knee. So it's like 100%, like, he's not wrong, he's totally right. But we always joke around like, oh, like, you have pain in your ear, straighten the glutes. Like, but that's because, all his knee stuff is, it's glutes, man. Glutes are huge for protecting the knee. And so, I say that to kind of, say when it comes to, taking that over to baseball is like, we got to look at the whole system. Because, at first glance, when you think of like knee issues, you don't think like, oh yeah, the problem is at the hip. But a lot of times it is. Most times it is. So like it's, same thing with the upper extremity is like, you have an issue here, like, let's look at the entire system, like what's going on at the shoulder, what's going on at the trunk, pelvis, like everything. And really see that whole system, that whole, especially with throwing, it's such a complex movement, and you're taking, energy and transferring it all the way up the chain from the ground into your hand. So it's like any leak of energy there can make a difference.
Oh, 1000%, dude. That is really kind of what we talked about in the last episode too, right? Episode 13, reductionist versus, macro, looking at the whole picture, right? And a part of this, I think, is also due to just the healthcare system in general, right? Those cash-based businesses, like you talked about with Dr. Powers, like they have a lot more autonomy to be able to do stuff because they don't have to report to insurance companies or whatever that's making them have that reductionist approach, because it's like, hey, we're only allowed to charge or do X, right? But they can't zoom out and look at the glutes or
Yeah.
look at the rest of the stuff, and it is what it is. But I think that's why those type of practices are a lot more successful, because they have less limitations on what they can charge
Yeah.
for. Obviously, there's no limitations from the customer because they're willing to pay out of pocket for whatever hasn't
Yeah.
worked for them,
It
right?
it
So
really sucks, the current system with insurance and all of that, limiting all that. It really grinds my gears with like kind of how that whole system is right now. And I have a
we have
story
a
to
whole nother
go with
podcast on
that.
that in general.
Yeah, I have a story to go with that. In one of my clinical rotations, it was like a typical outpatient ortho clinic. And I remember someone was having an issue with their knee, um, knee pain, whatever. And I noticed like, oh, like clearly her glute med is super weak because she had this massive hip drop.
Hmm.
And I was like, yeah, like, and knee valgus and like everything that like, at MPI, we're like, all right, like, yeah, clearly strengthen the glutes here, like, boom, easy. And I remember like mentioning it to my CI and being like, hey, like, shouldn't we be like targeting the glutes here, like whatever, this and that. And the response I got was like, oh, like, yes, but if we put in like for the insurance, if we charge for like hip strengthening session, they won't reimburse us because we're not targeting the issue.
Right.
And I was like, first of all, in my opinion, it's like, all right, like if you can justify it in the note and say like why we're targeting the hip and whatever, I think the insurance would figure it out and be like, okay, yes, like we're targeting the knee pain in this issue, and like but to me, it's like the fact that that's even an issue that we're having to figure out like what the insurance is going to pay for and what the insurance is not, when at the end, like we're the professionals who are trying to figure out the issue and solve our patient's issue. It's like that's, to me, like you have people sitting in an office deciding the care that a patient is going to get. I think that's horrible. I think it's unbelievable.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on that. And I think that's why sometimes, again, it's not the therapist's fault. It's just what they're able to do and the confines of what restrictions that they have. Right. So
Yeah.
something that I always have to take a zoomed out, again, macro look at things and just be like, okay, hey, like what's really the issue, or what's really restricting this guy? Or hey, maybe you don't have the resources like Dr. Powers does with all the biomechanics and all this stuff. And you
Yeah.
just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
That's goes the
and
same in baseball or anything else.
yeah. And with that too, is like whether you have like all the resources that a big, badass facility like that has or not. One of the cool things of Dr. Powers having him as a professor in multiple classes is like one of the big things that he tried to kind of leave us with is like, this is how I do all of my stuff. And like, this is my approach. This is how I look at biomechanics. This is, all this stuff. But then it was like, if you don't have all the cool stuff that I have, which like most of us probably won't, like, this is how you do it anyways. And it's like everybody has an iPad, a phone, whatever, like a camera in their pocket that they
Love it.
can, use to do biomechanics analysis. A handheld dynamometer is not that crazy expensive. You get your hands on one of those. It may not be, as accurate as like a whole Cybex machine. But you can do a lot with a handheld dynamometer in measuring strength, if you know how to set it up right. So like you can be resourceful and do all of that stuff, with limited resources, 100%. But the idea is tracking stuff. And if, you may not be tracking, everything that you could, but tracking as much as you can, I think, is really important to make sure that guys are on track. And not only are they on track with like, are we pushing them enough, but are they recovering well? Are they on the right, we're essentially making sure we have good and often enough snapshots of where they are to make sure they're on the right track and they're not veering or falling behind or having these peaks and valleys.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of what you were bringing up before is retesting, right? I
Yep.
think a lot of it, a lot guys get all these tests pre or post op or before they go return to play, but then after they're playing, they're like, all right, yep, see ya.
Yeah.
No other follow up or anything, so I think that's
And
something that
that's tough too. I think that's something that we got to get kind of everybody on, coaches, strength coaches, performance, everything, is like, especially with people who have had injuries and surgeries before, is like the biggest risk of injury is previous injury. And so like making sure, especially with people who don't go to a super badass clinic like MPI or something like that, is like making sure they're on the right track and they're not falling back into bad habits. Because I think when it comes to like that specific like thing of like the biggest, risk of injury is re-injury, is like, I think part of that comes from too, is a lot of people aren't preparing people as well as they need to be prepared. And so they have some of the issues pre like the first injury, that have lingered, that then caused them to get injured again. Whereas
yeah,
like,
because that wasn't
if
addressed. Oh yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
if you handle all of those injuries and lower injury risk and mitigate all that stuff, maybe they have even less risk of injury than someone who's completely healthy, never been hurt. So I think you know, a lot of that, making sure that we're retesting, making sure everybody's, moving, efficiently. Their strength is where it needs to be. They're not, going out and pushing on a day that they're ultra fatigued and they might not be able to handle the stresses of competition or whatever. Like making sure that we're testing all that stuff and making sure people are have good routines and all that stuff.
No doubt. No doubt about it. Well, and then there's other things too that whatever it is you're measuring, right? You got to just consistently measure it, whether it's the fancy stuff or whether it's something as simple as a hand grip dynamometer or your sleep or, even just general readiness.
Hydration, like that's big too.
Sure.
Like what does my pee look like? Like that's
That's a good
massive.
one.
And I think that's something that's super important, especially like I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. Like it is so dry out here. And that's something that I've noticed is like, man, I'm drinking so much water and I'm still so dehydrated. And that has massive implications, not just on like injury risk, but also performance, like
Mental
huge,
fatigue. Oh,
huge,
100%.
yeah, huge performance implications for sure. So just like there's so much to track, and you don't want to get so carried away that you don't dome yourself up. But I definitely think there's a lot of value in making sure that you're kind of on top of all your stuff and making sure all facets of the game are being looked at and are dialed in.
100%. Definitely can agree with you on that. And electrolytes, even just not water alone will be able to do it, but you got to make sure you have that in too.
Exactly. Exactly.
Electrolytes.
Salt, get that in. Pedialyte. You got a lot of guys who are getting Pedialyte over here.
Oh yeah, I love it. I
Important.
have actually, not to get off the tangent, but these Pedialyte pops, me and my now fiance just loved having
Yeah.
that time because it's like, hey, it's like you're having an ice pop, but it's also electrolytes in it too.
Yeah, man. It's good stuff.
You notice when you
Delicious.
don't have
Good
it.
for
You're
you.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. It's great, man. It's great stuff. It's great stuff. But yeah, man. And on that note, like recovery, especially in PT, but performance, everything, recovery is so important.
mhm,
Um, and I think that's something that people get wrong a lot, is like, what is recovery truly?
sure.
And how do I like dial that in best as possible, and where should I start? There's a lot of really sexy recovery stuff out nowadays. You got like BFR, you got Normatec, you got Mark Pro, you got like all this cool tech,
Air
which
guns. Yeah.
yeah, and it's all great. Like all that stuff is awesome, and I'm all for it. You got like the light therapy stuff, like great, awesome stuff. Um, but like you'll see guys that'll be dialed in on all that stuff, hitting all that every day. They're like super focused on getting that, making sure that, and then they're sleeping like 3-4 hours a night.
Or
Like
their
eating
nutrition's
crap,
absolute
getting
crap
McDonald's
too.
every day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, you got to set your priorities straight. I think that's the foundation is like, make sure you're sleeping. And like, I had Whoop for, like 3 years when I was playing ball. Now I have the Aura ring. And so like, that was something that when I first started using Whoop, I realized like I would sleep 8 hours a night and get 7 hours of sleep truly. And I realized too, I was someone that needed more sleep than others because I didn't get as high quality sleep. And so I ended up, once I was dialed in on it, I was sleeping 10 to 12, sometimes more hours a night from like sleep to wake. And that's what I needed to truly be prepared every day. Some guys, bless you, some guys can do less because they sleep higher quality. But that I think is super important, is like dialing that and understanding like you got to get a lot of sleep to really be recovered for a lot of guys. Um, and that's the massive foundation. Like that's where our bodies are really rebuilding and getting after it. And then on top of that, you got to give it the nutrients and kind of the building blocks to build back and like make sure that we're eating right. We're dialed in, everything's clean, we're getting the protein we need, we're eating meat, we're getting everything that we need. And not eating a bunch of stuff with preservatives and a bunch of crap in it. And really being locked in. And then from there, if all of that's dialed in, I think that's when we can start, thinking about like, all right, how do we get all the other 1%? Like, yeah, sure. Like let's dial in the Mark Pro. Let's throw on some BFR, some BFR stuff post. Let's get all the stuff that's going to be great and going to be additions. But if the foundation isn't there, like, I hate to break it to you, but your 15-minute Mark Pro session after throwing ain't going to do that much if you're sleeping 3 hours a night.
Absolutely. I love using this analogy for athletes and even trying to describe this to parents too is, if you have a bank account, the, uh, just them being able to pay the bills. That's your foundational movements or foundational things that you're going to have versus trying to shoot for financial freedom. If you can't pay the bills, you're not going to have that. Right.
Yeah.
So what's the point of focusing on those 1% things if you don't even have those foundational movements down?
100%. That's a great analogy. I'm gonna steal that from you. I'm gonna use that.
Go for it. Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely. That'll be on one of the other podcasts that have coming out soon too. Uh,
oh,
but Alex, man, dude, I really appreciate you coming on, my man. I know it's kind of in a thick of it timeline for you too. So I appreciate you taking the time to carve out. And what else have you been diving into before we kind of wrap this thing up and then we can tag your socials and everything again.
yeah. I mean, so right now the big thing I'm really diving into is like right now like progressions, like post-surgery progressions and post-injury progressions and all that stuff. Just because, especially with sports, we don't get as much of that in school. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing that we're not getting as much progression stuff in school. Because they try to give us the foundation of critical thinking so that we can then
I think that's
develop that
something you
for
need, just
ourselves.
like we talked about before, right? You need those
Yeah.
foundational things.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
versus I think if they would have started off with like these are the progressions, I think you end up developing a lot of people who then just kind of blindly follow.
Mhm.
So I think not necessarily that that's a bad thing, but that's kind of the big thing that I'm working on right now is like building that knowledge and that critical thinking skills of being able to develop progressions and look at protocols that have been written in the past and then develop kind of my own thought process and my own progressions and kind of how I want to jump into that. So that's kind of the big thing I'm working on now. But yeah, nothing crazy. Just kind of getting those skills down. And as I kind of jump into residency and the beginning of my true professional career as a PT, is just kind of honing those skills and stuff so that when I finish residency and then possibly a baseball fellowship, I can kind of jump into it and get after it and kind of be at the top of my game and help as many people as I can on the baseball front, both rehab, performance, everything. Love to be, kind of wearing all the hats and be the coach, the performance guy, the PT guy, and do it all.
Oh, absolutely. I love that you were saying like when you go back to other progressions, you want to question it. You don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel, right? But you're basically just kind of seeing, okay, hey, what's this thought process? What did this actually entail to then lead to their own progression or way of doing things, and you are formulating your own thought process
Yeah.
and
And
keeping it
every
at,
guy's going to be different too. I think that's the important part is like, if I just have a protocol that I blindly follow for every single guy, it's not going to work best for every single guy. So, it depends on the situation, the guy, the context and all that.
yeah, which we covered in the last episode. So
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
guys want to listen in episode 13 again, plug it in there. But Alex, thanks again so much, dude. What's the best way for guys to reach out to you? Social media handles, emails, any of that stuff.
Yeah, so you can find me on my social media handle. I think is Dr. Vado VEDO FSP, and then you can find our business Fearless Sports Performance at Fearless Sports Performance, and then on Twitter. So that's on Instagram. On Twitter, our handles Fearless BSBL. And then you can check out our website as well, which is fearlesssportsperformance.weebly.com. And you can reach out, anyway through DM, on the website. It'll kind of give some information on reaching out to us as well. And always open, any guy that wants to learn, that has questions, that wants to connect, just talk, whether that's an athlete or someone who kind of wants to get into the rehab and performance coaching world. Reach out. I love talking, and I love meeting people, and I love, creating those connections. So, always open to that.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Alex. And for those of you listening, please share the show if you got any value out of this, and stay in the zone.